This radio show is a paid placement. Welcome to Wealth Michigan with the McIntoshes. I'm Mark Elliott. Glad you're with us today. Mindy McIntosh, the founder and president of McIntosh and Associates, started the company back in 2004. Husband Nolan McIntosh, he can help you with all your market investments. Are you taking too much risk in your portfolio? Not enough risk or the right amount for you? And certainly the markets are a little scratchy right now. People are a little concerned about inflation, interest rates rising, markets being scratchy, war in Ukraine, Russia. There's just a lot of uncertainty right now in the world. If you have uncertainty around where you are on your road to retirement, it's a great opportunity to talk with the team at McIntosh and Associates. It's 877-222-8849. There's no cost, no obligation, no pressure, no judgment. 877-222-8849. If you'd like to find out more about Mindy and Nolan and the team, go to the website. Some great information there, wealthmichigan.com. wealthmichigan.com. We're going to get into a lot of things as we always do on this program. Our final segment, we've got part 2 of the Financial Fiscal House with Mindy. But Nolan, I'm going to start with you. We know that gas prices are crazy high. Who knew that Tom Brady, worth around $250 million, and Gisele Bundchen, his supermodel wife, that things were getting so tight, his retirement only lasted a month. And he's back because of gas prices. He's back.
That's right. Yeah. It's amazing, right? You go, 4 weeks and then finally decide that. I honestly think, this is just my own opinion, but I don't think that he liked the way that it got out before he retired. So I think he just wants one more shot at, making his own announcement. So that's my opinion. But hey, maybe it is. Maybe it is the gas prices. He's got a lot of homes too, so maybe that's part of it too. He needs to afford those. So
yeah, and really he's going to be 45 in August. So the next football season is 45. And you, as a former physical trainer and all of that, I think we all appreciate that Brady is able to compete, and he was great last year. So I'm all for it. I like that.
No, it's amazing. Now, let's be fair. He barely gets touched, and when he does get touched, there's some complaining there. But he's had some good offensive linemen through his years, so that does help a lot.
But his arm is still incredible.
It is.
He can still throw the football. Yep. Did you like the Matthew Stafford commercials during March Madness?
I no.
What?
Because he's playing for a different team now.
I know, but he said,
like him anymore?
So wait, I can keep this old phone that I had for 12 years, and I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate it. I thought it was a nice commercial.
Yeah, I know. They're giving a little love to Detroit, right?
Yeah.
But,
so, Mindy, hey, how are you, Mindy?
I am great. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well. And so you think about it. We've got the continued chaos in Europe, inflation, higher fuel prices. We got the Fed met earlier in March and raised the interest rates 0.25%. So there's a lot going on right now, and there's a lot of talk that, hey, we might be headed for a recession. We had the Great Recession, 07 to March of 09. People are getting a little nervous with all the things going on. I guess, what are you seeing? What do you look at? Economic indicators, Mindy, do you look at that you're saying to your clients, hey, now's a perfect time to panic or hold off? Let's just wait and see.
Yeah, we're looking at, indicators as far as what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the job market, right? So a lot of folks are still looking to fill positions in their employment. On the other side of things, we're trying to gauge, what's happening with performance, which is somewhat strong, but also what are we seeing from manufacturing orders, or what are we seeing from, still the housing industry? Interest rates went up a little bit, yes, but, folks still can't purchase a home fast enough in our area right now. So how is that actually going alongside of, employment and interest rates and the stock market and stock pricing right now? The economic indicators are somewhat real time, but we don't need to take a look at the public's, overall viewpoint of this. We can also take a look at personal wealth and current stock prices with what's happening in Ukraine with the Ukraine and Russia. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're going into a recession either, even though we have seen those stock prices plummet. So there's a variety of factors that we look at that we see with the interest rates, current Ukraine and Russia, but still housing market and such. And, when we look at the positioning of jobs that are available, there's a lot to look at to see, gosh, where do we really think we're going as an economy, and how do we help stabilize and protect our, individuals and protect our clients?
Yeah, and we're looking at it from our standpoint too, is that there are some indicators that we watch, particularly in the Treasury world. So the 2-year Treasury and the 10-year Treasury. Anytime in the last 50 years we've seen those inverted yields, meaning if 2 years earning more than a 10-year, which you wouldn't expect, right? You'd expect a 10-year to earn over a 2-year. we've actually seen a recession following every single time in the last 50 years. So we are watching those closely. They're not inverted yet, meaning 2 years not making more than a 10-year, but they're only 0.24% off. So they're not far. So that's why we make sure that we don't have everything involved in the stock market. That's why we do the Dream Focus Wealth Plan for our clients, is so that way we don't care if it inverts, because we know we have some in safety and we don't necessarily have to possibly touch the market accounts if we didn't have to because of what's going to happen in the future. So we try and control a little bit of that if we can. So it's one of those things that we always look at income first and then go from there.
So if you'd like to talk with the team, you're like, some of this stuff is kind of confusing to me. I'm not really sure how it's going to affect my retirement. We know inflation is not great right now. We know fuel prices are high, gas, the grocery store, things are costing more. What should we be doing? How do we set up our portfolio now in this kind of a situation? Talk with the team at McIntosh & Associates. Mindy and Nolan here to help. It's 877-222-8849. There's no cost for this, no obligation. 877-222-8849. And since really March of 2009, Nolan, the markets were on a roll like crazy. We had the pandemic where we had the 5-week downturn of like 32%, but it came back really quickly. And then 2022 starts, and the markets are getting really bumpy because of all the other things going on. Is this a time that people ought to maybe look at rebalancing? And maybe before you say yes or no, you kind of give me what is rebalancing? What does that mean?
Yeah, sure. So rebalancing a lot of times is depending on how we invest, and so I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that, but typically when we're rebalancing, we're looking at stock-to-bond ratios within a person's portfolio. So let's say somebody's been accumulating, the stock market did really well in 2021, so maybe one of the funds that they're holding in their portfolio really gained steam and is actually overweighted in their portfolio. But now that we've seen the stock market kind of go down, we'll see that there's some issues there. So it might be a time to, try and, if it's still up, right, that we might rebalance and put some into more safety. And usually that means in putting some bonds into the portfolio a little bit to help, obviously hedge some of the risk there that's in the market. Now, granted, bonds aren't necessarily doing that great. So it's one of those things that people say, well, I'm not getting any growth out of these bonds, and I've done really good in the stock market. Well, that's not what they're designed for, really. Ultimately, a lot of times bonds are designed to hedge in case the market does something negative. There's usually some type of inverse relationship there between the market and the bonds, and from a stock to bond ratio standpoint. So that's the difficult part that we're trying to balance a little bit with our clients, is that we're trying to make sure that we're hedging inflation, because bonds aren't necessarily earning what they're supposed to with a 7.5% rate of inflation, but yet the stocks are kind of volatile. So we're feathering that as much as we can, and we're trying to actively go in and say, okay, we need to rebalance here and tweak this here and there. Not necessarily, a lot of people think of rebalance as an overhaul of a person's portfolio. It is not. It is just a tweaking. Warren Buffett, he's been famous for this. He's been, he's a big buy and hold type of guy, pattern, and then he just tweaks it. He tweaks his portfolios every once in a while, and that's how he's been able to accumulate all this wealth all these years. So a rebalancing act may be one of those things that we want to look at if we're overweighted more in stocks right now than we are in bonds, just to try and see if there's something we can do to try and hedge some of that market risk that we're seeing.
And certainly with, the old 60-40, right? 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds. And you get older, you flip-flop it, maybe it's 60% in bonds, 40% in stocks. We know when interest rates rise, bond values go down. So it's not been a great time for bonds either. I mean, the stock market gets bumpy, and it used to be back in the day, probably before 2000. If the stocks were going well, bonds were not doing well. Then if stocks were poor, then bonds were doing well. But that's not the case really since 2000. They kind of go together. They both go up or they both go down. So interest rates were raised 0.25% by the Fed. They're going to meet 6 more times this year, Mindy. Do we need to pay attention to the Fed adjusting interest rates and the effect of that? Are there effects of that?
Absolutely. And I think we're going to continue to see that go up, and so when we talk about, I call the old rule of thumb, the 60-40 split that we're talking about, when we take a look at the new, more holistic vision approach on that, is a lot of times, we're sitting in a really good position with our clients just because a lot of them don't have a whole lot of bonds in their portfolio. They use more of a bond alternative strategy, giving them the opportunity to be in what's called an indexed annuity, and not only to have a bond alternative that's actually producing better returns, but it's also a way to produce income for these customers of ours, and it's helping to do an increased payout factor for them to help hedge the inflationary increases that we are going to continue to see. I really feel like we're going to continue to see that needle move, and we need to make sure that our clients are put in a position that most are either in or nearing retirement, And, how do we make sure that that's effectively going to sustain their lifestyle for the next 20 or 30 years? If you need to see what this looks like, if you're someone that's visual or wants to see that on paper, let's make sure that we really take a look at, your overall portfolio and your plan. And just give us a call here at the office at 877-222-8849. Let's take a look at that so we can really focus on your worries. Because I know there's a lot of you out there. You just want someone that you can rely on to help carry you along and get you in the right direction as things change, and they're ever changing, and we're going to continue to see that happening.
So that's 877-222-8849, and a great opportunity for you as well to do your own little research. You can find out more about Mindy and Nolan and the team at McIntosh and Associates just by going to their website, wealthmichigan.com. wealthmichigan.com. We're just getting started today. We've got a lot to get to with Mindy and Nolan. We're back with more of Wealth Michigan with the McIntoshes right after this.
Who will help you get there? Wherever you want to go and whatever you want to do in retirement, McIntosh and Associates can help you get there. You do the dreaming, they do the planning. It's your retirement, but you need a guide. As you approach retirement, McIntosh and Associates can make sure you're on the path to retire on your terms. And once you're retired, they'll help you stay on course. Think of it as a roadmap for your retirement. The team at McIntosh and Associates wants you to have the retirement you've worked so hard for. Come in and meet with them today. They'll help you create a retirement roadmap that's tailored to your dreams, your lifestyle, and long-term financial goals. Call today at 877-222-8849 and schedule a visit. Call 877-222-8849. That's 877-222-8849. Firm offers insurance services. Investment advisory services offered only by duly registered individuals through AE Wealth Management, LLC.
Get started today to develop your own dream-focused wealth plan with the team at McIntosh and Associates. Schedule a complimentary first visit today. Call 877-222-8849.
Glad you're with us today for Wealth Michigan with the McIntoshes, Mindy and Nolan. I'm Mark Elliott. You have any questions about where you are on your road to retirement? The team at McIntosh and Associates, in conjunction with you, if it's your retirement, you're the CEO because it's your hopes and dreams and your bucket list, items that you want to do. It's a dream-focused wealth plan at McIntosh and Associates. Starts with that discovery meeting, which is Mindy and Nolan need to find out more about you. What are your wishes? What are your hopes for retirement? Then there's an analysis. Then there's a solution. Then they implement it. And then that's not the end of it. It's not like, here's the plan, dream-focused wealth plan. Good luck to you. Hope it all works out. That's not how it works. They're with you through retirement as well. So there's updates because things are always happening in our lives. We always have to adjust as we go along. And that's the dream-focused wealth plan. You'd like to learn more, again, it's 877-222-8849. We're going to spend the next two segments talking about women and retirement. Mindy, the numbers are always out. And right now they're saying women statistically outlive men by about 6 years. So that means a lot of wives will outlive their husbands in retirement. We certainly know the opposite can happen. But typically, the man's going to live a shorter time period than the wife, if you will. So a lot of women then will be taking over their own finances, which for a lot, back in the day, I think for sure, maybe in my grandparents' time, it was certainly my granddad doing all the money stuff. I think my mom probably did a lot more of the financial stuff than her mom. And I think that's kind of the way it's going right now. But it can be a little confusing, and it's certainly scary because it's an emotional time you lose a spouse. So let's start with, Mindy, some of the differences you've noticed between how men and women approach retirement planning. Let's say, and if I gave you these, let's say that I said, okay, here's what I want out of my money. I want growth, I want income, I want safety. What is number one on the men's priority list? What would be number one on the women's priority list?
Men are normally looking for growth. The women really want safety and income. I'm not sure which one would go one or two. It's kind of a flip-flop with our clients here, but they want to be protected, right? So they want to come in, be part of the family, know that, hey, I'm going to lay it all on the line. Here's our thoughts, our hopes, our concerns, and our dreams. And I just really want to be protected. And a lot of times it's just, am I going to have enough money and will I be okay? Or on the flip side, they're just confused a little bit about different tax classifications and what accounts they need to draw from and how they'll draw from them and How do they read their statements properly, right? And so they're laying it all on the line, even though they might be in their 60s and saying, hey, I don't really even understand how to read these statements. I realize I should have learned this maybe a long time ago. And just being open and saying, I just need a piece of security. So a lot of times we can provide that, and we just walk through what we call our Dream Focused Wealth Plan, make them very comfortable about, look, in our discovery process, let's walk through, where is income coming from? Maybe you're still working. Maybe you have rental properties. It could be Social Security. Maybe it's a spousal income still at this point in time. But where is the income actually coming from today? What's happening over the next, 5, 10, 20 years? A lot of women talk a lot about their children, grandchildren, being close to them, and how will we actually create and turn their retirement accounts that they saved money into? How do we change that into more of an income stream, but giving them the sense of security? They're not looking for double-digit rates for return like the men are. They want to make sure that they are going to be okay and what they're looking to do. And realistically, that's the best way to start with a visit. And, I know a lot of you listening probably are not feeling exactly comfortable with where you're at today and where you're looking to go. So let us kind of help walk through that and look through your plan path, and stop by our office here in Freeland, or go to the website at wealthmichigan.com and set up a visit, because we need to make sure that we get you in that comfort zone, or at least talk about what is, your concerns, because you're totally going to be different than your male counterpart for sure.
So women statistically outlive men by about 6 years. Now, if there's a 5-year age difference to start with, now we're looking at 11 years that the woman might be by herself. There's certainly a lot of things that come into play. How does that fact, Nolan, come into when you're sitting down with a couple and you're talking about, hey, maybe you have to kill off the husband, or you got to kill off the wife, and kind of say, here's what the situation would be. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but you do have to plan for it, I would imagine.
Yeah, we do. I mean, 'cause you got to remember, income's going to change possibly, right? Because maybe they're collecting 2 Social Securities. Now one of them goes away, right? So there's possibly half of an income that's going away. So we do have to plan for that. And that's one of those things we always try and stress test everything to make sure that if there's a what if there, which we can't solve for every time, but if there's a what if, how can we solve for that and help? And so that's why income planning is so important, that that we help to make sure that the spouse is protected just as much as, and I think that's part of the, a lot of times that we see with husbands as well, is that they want to see that the wife is going to be okay when they go. Because like you said, statistically, it's going to be that they're, and they know that it's common knowledge. And so I think a lot of times, even though the male might not, the husband might not agree with, hey, but when we come and say, hey, your wife's going to be protected too, then they're like, yeah, I get that. I really like that idea of it. So that's why we always have to make sure that we have that income plan set, because if something were to happen, then, half of that goes away. And I think it's so important. A lot of women, unfortunately, don't like to go through it. They'll come to the meetings, or the visits, we call them, but they don't necessarily want to ask questions, or kind of just want to let the male take over. And unfortunately, we've seen it with our clients, is that they become widowed, the wife does, and they have no idea where to go. Now, obviously, we help them pick up the pieces there, but it's so much harder on them because they don't know where to go. And so if they at least have a plan, and they at least have, know an idea of what's going on and where they're supposed to be doing, it helps out so much more from a stress standpoint, because it's hard enough losing a mate and not having to worry about where the income's coming from, or who do we contact, or where do we turn type of thing. It can be such a stress reliever for the person that's left behind. And there's a phenomenal book. David Bach wrote a book called Smart Women Finish Rich, and it's not talking about monetary rich. It's talking about how emotionally and physically it can be so much better if they're involved somewhat. Not necessarily have to know everything in and outs, but if they at least know this is what this is for, this is what this is for, that's kind of the key. And it's a phenomenal book. I'd recommend any woman out there that hasn't gotten involved with some of the financial aspects of the household to read that book, and it really sets the tone on how to look at things from that standpoint.
So we can put them kind of in our book club, Mark. I kind of call that there, because we have a lot of women that I do personally work here a lot with, single, widowed, or divorced women. Sometimes they're more comfortable meeting with me because it comes from a woman's aspect. We think differently. What's important to us is different. And that book has been really instrumental to some of our clients. And then we can talk about it and discuss. And a big thing, too, that we see is, Nolan's right. We'll have a lot of couples that actually come in together. And the male can at least express what he wants to happen if he were to pass away prior to his wife. How does he want things handled, whether it's, while he's still living, from maybe failing mentally to dementia to long-term care, or it's just strictly passing away. And hey, now how are the pieces going to be handled, and how do we walk through this together to set her up in a good position? So we like to talk about it all up front. And then other times it just doesn't work that way. And we have, a widower or someone who's single calls and comes in for a visit, and they just can talk about, I haven't really maybe taken charge of the finances, and how and where do I start on bringing this all together? And then we just work together and walk through that and make sure that, when you leave, we put you in a better place than when you came. You're comfortable, you're confident. And, whether it's the book or the visits we have, it really starts to set a stage for them to, have their financials and their plan in order.
And you bring up an interesting point, though, because I think a lot of times when you sit down with a couple, you want both husband and wife to be there. And maybe one is more into the finances and the investments and all of that. But if the other one that is not involved then is left by themselves, there's some challenges there. And Nolan talked about the loss of Social Security. If you lose a spouse, you lose the lower of the two Social Securities. You might lose some or all of a pension. And then, hey, congratulations, you were married for 40 years. But next year, you're going to have to file as a single person when it comes to your taxes. So your taxes have just gone up. There's a lot of whammies besides the emotional side of this. And I think, Mindy, back in the day, it used to be financial advisors would really just talk to the man, not even kind of recognize that the woman was there. I think that's changing. And certainly with you, that's probably never been an issue at all. How important is it to have both husband and wife in these meetings?
It's extremely important. And, we see now all the time, obviously, no, I've never addressed just the male in all of my 20 years, but of course not, right? Because I'm female. But, we're seeing more and more. We just had a meeting earlier this week. I was meeting with a gentleman, very interesting. Actually grew up in England and moved here in his 20s with his bride. And we had an initial meeting. I said, you know what? When we move on to the analysis process after this discovery meeting, I would love for your wife to join us. He said, you know what? You're absolutely right. She kind of has me handle this, but I would love for her opinion to be in this. And that way she is also working hand in hand with the office as well. And you know what? A lot of times you just see that relationship then blossom as far as our relationship here with them as the clientele. And each equally, sometimes we're seeing husband answer some of the questions, wife fills in with the other. Sometimes we can laugh about their risk or who wants to travel more, who's the saver, who's the spender. It is fun. And the more things as a couple around the world, and I even call it in your relationship, the more things you can do together, the better. And that way too, when something happens in the future, whether it's an illness or someone's passing, it's a lot easier to know what was happening in our financials, what was the goals and dreams of my spouse, and now how do we actually make that portion, not a pain point of what you already might be going through.
So here's the deal, really. Whether you're married, single, widowed, or divorced, the fact is most of us do not have a plan for our financial future. The numbers are out there. It's nearly 70%, and I have other people say, well, it's probably 80% of Americans do not have a written financial plan. Well, that is the Dream Focused Wealth Plan at McIntosh & Associates. Mindy and Nolan put it together. You're the CEO because it's your retirement, it's your hopes and dreams. Look at the McIntosh & Associates as your chief financial officer, here to help guide you. You're the pilot. They're the co-pilot. It's your life. How can they help it be better? Maybe give you more confidence and clarity heading into retirement. The number is 877-222-8849. Again, no cost for this. Team's here to help. They just don't know if they can until they hear from you. 877-222-8849. 8849. You can always find out more on the website, wealthmichigan.com. Back with more about women in retirement with Mindy and Nolan. This is Wealth Michigan with the McIntoshes.
Of all the questions you get asked every day, this is one you shouldn't ignore. How much money in your 401k or IRA is actually yours? Not what its current value is, but how much of it will end up in your pocket, not the government's. Remember, you still might owe taxes on that money. Make sure you aren't overpaying. Keep every dollar you're entitled to. Look, I know it's confusing, it's complicated, and it's definitely not fun. That's why at McIntosh & Associates, we work with tax professionals to help make sure you aren't paying more in taxes than your fair share. It's your money. You deserve to know what's at stake. Call our team at McIntosh and Associates today. Get started. 877-222-8849. 877-222-8849. Don't do the IRS any favors. 877-222-8849. Firm offers insurance services and may not give tax advice. Investment advisory services offered only by duly registered individuals through AE Wealth Management, LLC.
Schedule your complimentary first visit with the McIntoshes right now. Call 877-222-8849. That's 877-222-8849.
Welcome back to Wealth Michigan with the McIntoshes, Mindy McIntosh, Nolan McIntosh. I'm Mark Elliott. You can always go to the website to find out more, wealthmichigan.com, wealthmichigan.com. You have any questions or concerns about where you are on your road to retirement? 877-222-8849. No cost to chat with the team. They're here to help. They just don't know if they can until they hear from you. 877-222-8849. Today we're talking about some of the unique challenges women face in preparing for retirement. And Mindy and Nolan, I know you guys have this list as well as I do. The Women's Institute for a Secure Retirement has a list of the top 5 retirement challenges for women. So the top 5, you've got the list. Why don't you guys discuss this for us? Because there's a lot of interesting numbers in here. I think most won't be surprised by some of them. But what do you got?
Well, I don't think it's any surprise. And they actually just came out with this again. And there's been some lessening of the gap, but there is definitely a gender pay gap if we look at statistical from women to men. Historically, that's been the case for a long time. And so obviously, if we're making less, might not be able to put away as much as a woman. So that might be part of the issue that we're seeing, obviously, with some of this. And then there's some, concern of lack of confidence, be able to do this because the women, statistically speaking, usually don't get involved. And usually they're just taking guidance sometimes from their husband or whatever that may be. And they're just kind of taking stabs in the dark on, okay, I guess I should be putting money away, but I just don't know how to, or I don't know what investments I should be in within my retirement plan, things of that nature, where sometimes men are more forward-thinking on that. And again, this is what we're talking statistical. Not every woman, right? So we're not going to put everybody in that pigeonhole, but that's sometimes some of the things that we see from that standpoint. So
we just have to help them pick themselves. So a lot of times the women, they might seem like they lack confidence, but you just got to find it. So we just a lot of times can help them to, for once, pick themselves. And, that's helped. And, we do see that women are having a longer lifespan. So women usually outlive men, and that does have an impact on their finances. And because we've already talked about the pay gap, as Nolan said, sometimes the pay gap too is women had time off while they were taking care of children, or now maybe they had to have a position that was more flexible to care for an aging parent. So that longer lifespan, they have a longer lifetime to live on the same amount of money as their male counterpart. And the caregiver responsibilities, I talked about that a little bit. They're the ones that take time off of work for the children when they're raising them, or the sick ones, or in-laws, or their own parents, of helping to care as they get older, and making sure that they're able to help even with sometimes raising grandchildren, especially with what we've seen through the pandemic. And that does have a great impact on them. And then we don't like to talk about it as much, obviously, as individuals, but, there's a greater financial fallout from divorce, normally from the women over the men, because of the income earnings. And, that costly divorce can have a negative impact on their ability to build a long-term wealth strategy, let alone to keep them to have their own self-confidence. So a lot of different ways that we see this kind of stem and could spiral if it's not, handled appropriately.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that and Mindy mentioned it, is that most of the time it falls on the woman, just because of they're different, that they're the ones that are child rearing, they're the ones that are going to take care of the kids, even through divorce, right? We see most of the time the moms are the ones that get the kids, and the dads just, we know how expensive kids can be. So if they're, number one, they're making less money, statistically speaking, than men. Number two, they're taking care of the kids. Well, that's a double-edged sword. So that's one of those things that we always have to kind of look at and make sure that we're trying to help these women as much as we can if some of those things happen. Now, granted, in my instance, my grandpa's 97. He outlived my grandma by over 20 years now. So it's one of those things that, it's not always the statistic, but it definitely can make an impact on how women view life and how they have to go through things in retirement. And that's why it's so important that we come together and help them, just because I think sometimes they do get left behind, and we don't want that to happen, especially with what we're seeing with some of the pandemic and things of that nature.
So it's really about having a plan when it comes to your retirement, the Dream Focused Wealth Plan, whether you're married, single, widowed, widower, divorced, whatever the situation, you need a plan for your retirement. It'll give you more confidence, more clarity with where you stand. 877-222-8849. No cost for this. 877-222-8849. Mindy, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but the numbers say about 40% of women investors identify as beginners. So it appears that a lot of women seem to lack confidence in their financial knowledge. You've touched on that. What are some steps maybe women should consider to help boost their financial confidence?
Well, they have to talk to somebody they trust. So they need to find that person, individual place they can go to say, hey, this is kind of where I'm at. And it's all right to be vulnerable and open up a little bit, because that is the foundation or the building block that can then identify maybe what was holding them up. What was their fear? What were they worried about? Maybe what were they in their head about that they never needed to be? And if they can verbalize that, get that off their shoulders, a lot of times then they can be able to move forward, feel more comfortable and relaxed, and say, hey, you don't have to do this all by yourself. So I'm always telling folks when they come in, this is not something you need to figure out all on your own. We're going to walk through this together and continue to evolve and implement different strategies for you. And, we just need to make sure too that they need to lean into their own learning style. So because we've been here for so long, I feel like I have a really good ability to be able to interact well with folks and really get to understand where they're at. So that way we can walk through together maybe the way that they like things to flow and how their style fits for them. And I think that if we can walk through that together and they can just approach and be open a little bit about their fears and then talk about their goals and what they're looking to do, it gets them on the right page. And then we just continue that, right? We don't stop. It's not a 1 and done or 3 and done or 5 and done. It's this continuous, repetitive working together. So call me. Let's have a visit at 877-222-8849 and get things kind of structured and just get it out there.
Yeah, and learning styles are different for everyone. I mean, that's the key, is that most people are visual learners. So for us to, just talk conceptually on, over the radio or even on the phone is not necessarily usually good enough. And then we'd like to give what's called deliverables. We'd like to get something in your hands to say, this is what the plan, Dream Focused Wealth Plan looks like. This is how we help you walk through that. And so visually holding something, visually seeing something really does help calm a lot of those fears that we have when people come in. So I think that's really key, is just don't talk about it. You got to do something about it and to visually see that. That's the key. And, the biggest thing is a lot of times, unfortunately, we don't have, a lot of people aren't on the same page. So when we have a wife and a husband come in, and like Mindy says, one to spender, one to saver, and that could be either one, right? But it's one of those things that sometimes accountability can go a long way. And if we're in the meeting together, not that it's awkward, but at least gets some things in the air and says, hey, this is what's going on. This is what we like to do. And sometimes, we'd like to think that husbands know everything about women, but guess what? We don't. And so sometimes, if we can get the woman to open up and say, this is really what I want, this is really what my fear is, this is really what I'm concerned about, sometimes it's not verbalized to the husband until we're in a third-party situation. And so that's why, counselors have a job. That's why sometimes we have a job, is to help, obviously, walk through that. Because what the husband's ideas of protecting the woman and making sure that they're okay when they're passing away is not necessarily what the woman is looking for. So I think that's the big key, too, is making sure that we're all on the same page with that.
Yeah, and the visual learners, too. I mean, all of you that are listening, I think the stats say, Mark, almost 70% of people do not have a written financial plan. So that means now more than ever, let's make sure that if you're worried about if you saved enough, if you're wondering when you can retire, most of you don't have a written plan, so how would you know? So let's make sure that we can get that in your hands. It's going to make you even feel more financially stable, especially knowledge is key. So we know where you're at. So you don't have to worry then, is my money going to last as long as I do? When can I afford to retire? We'll have this process put together of your retirement income strategy and just making sure that, we can set that up. And again, because you probably don't have an income strategy set up, it's a great time to set a visit get things written down. If you haven't, uncovered a budget or looked at main risks in your investment portfolio or your standard of living and costs, set a visit here and reach out to the team or myself, or go onto our website at wealthmichigan.com and we'd be happy to start that process with you.
So the Dream Focused Wealth Plan starts with a discovery meeting, which is to find out about your hopes, your dreams, your bucket list, things that you want to accomplish. And then you figure out, where's the income going to come from? What about your investment strategies? What about tax-efficient strategies? We know the tax law that went into play 2018 ends in 2025, and in 2026 we're going to go back to the 17 rates and brackets. So your taxes are going up in 2026 by 3 or 4%. That's if the Biden administration does nothing. So that opportunity to maybe move some of that money into the Roth world, our window's kind of shrinking a little bit on some of these opportunities you have. Then what about health and long-term care planning? What about legacy and estate planning? Social Security, when and how do we take it? That's in the income part. Medicare, that's in the healthcare part. There's just so many moving parts, and that's why it's so important to have the Dream Focused Wealth Plan. Have a written retirement plan that's all about you and your situation. 877-222-8849 again is the number. No cost, no obligation for this. The team at McIntosh & Associates are here to help. They just don't know if they can until they hear from you. So they'd love to hear from you. 877-222-8849. Headed to our final segment right after this. This is Wealth Michigan with the McIntoshes, Mindy and Nolan. Back in 1 minute. Glad you're with us today for Wealth Michigan with the McIntoshes. Mindy McIntosh, the founder and president of McIntosh & Associates, started the company back in 2004. Nolan McIntosh, he's here to help you with all of your market investments. Are you taking too much risk, not enough risk, the right amount of risk? And then Mindy and Nolan kind of team up to help you in the tax world. Mindy can certainly help you in the life insurance, the Medicare world. There's just a lot of moving parts. We really need to have a plan at the end of the day. Really what we want to know is, if we retire, we're going to be okay. Give the team a call, 877-222-8849. There's no cost, 877-222-8849. You can always find out more on the website, wealthmichigan.com. All right, Mindy, last time we did this, you did a part 1 on our fiscal financial house, and today you're wrapping it up with part 2, I believe.
You bet. So this is Fiscal House Part 2, and we're really looking at building strategies. So right now, just like an experienced builder, that homes have been selling quicker than they can almost go up or being put for sale on the market, they have a disposal and the knowledge of necessary tools to build their strong, weather-resistant home. So we're really looking at asset allocation. So we need to work towards your unique needs and make sure that we don't, put all of your eggs in one basket. And we want to make sure that we're using various financial vehicles for some diversification to help hedge for you. And within that diversification, we want to make sure that we're helping you against many of the risks of maybe a poorly performing vehicle. And it's a good idea to select a variety of options within the category to make sure that as things change, as one thing goes up, another thing can move sideways. And how do we make sure that that works well together? And cost management. Now more than ever, you need to be focused on diversification, yes, of financial vehicles, but you cannot ignore how much these wide variety of diversification can cost you. So I think it's so important that when you're building a budget with this house, we have to cut back in some areas, make sure where can we decrease some expenses in appliances or landscaping. And when it comes to financial assets and management and holding fees, let's make sure that you're not being feed to death. And let's have a chance to meet together with your goals and anticipated time frame to make sure that most of your funds are working well for you. Risk management too. As you age, we work with a lot of people that are nearing retirement. We do not want you to have the same degree of risk you did in your 40s when you're in your 60s. So let's take a look at risk of market loss and inflation. So let's protect those walls, floor, and ceiling with these elements. And remodeling, Mark, we can't forget about that. That just means we got to make sure that we're doing updates, convenient layouts, watching your efficiency, and making sure that as your goals change, your asset allocations change as well, and keep it sustainable. So sustainability means keeping your fiscal house in a nice long-term goals to make sure that your retirement assets last longer than you. So call us at 877-222-8849 and let's help you build your fiscal house.
Nolan, we've got 1 minute left. And one of the challenges right now is the bond world. With interest rates starting to rise by the Fed, bonds go the opposite way of interest rates. So interest rates go up, bond values go down. This is kind of where you have bond alternatives to kind of help our financial house, right?
Yeah, 100%. And so that's why we even go to our website. We have a little place that you can get on your calendar. I can do a 15-minute review on where your portfolio is on the bonds and see if there's an alternative that we can help you with. Because if bonds aren't going to be doing what they're supposed to do, then why don't we put it in something that has some safety with at least hedging inflation to where we can maybe go more equity side on the market accounts, but maybe have more safety on the non-bond term alternatives that we talked about. And there's a nice little review that we can do, a bond review on our website that you can click and schedule yourself in. I'd love to do that. So wealthmichigan.com is where you can get that information, and I'd love to be able to talk with you on the phone about that.
Yeah, that's a great one. Wealthmichigan.com. You want to learn more about the bond world, because that was the old way of doing it. We'd go 60% stocks, 40% bonds. We'd get older, we'd flip it. Well, the bond world is not great right now. There are bond alternatives. The team at McIntosh and Associates here to walk you through some of your options that you may not even know about. And you can always give them a call, obviously, 877-222-8849, 877-222-8849.
McIntosh and Associates Incorporated is an independent financial services firm that utilizes a variety of investment and insurance products. Investment advisory services offered only by duly registered individuals through AE Wealth Management LLC, AEWM. AEWM and McIntosh and Associates Incorporated are not affiliated companies. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the issuing carrier. This radio show is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual's situation. McIntosh and Associates Incorporated is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during the show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by McIntosh and Associates Incorporated. Bond obligations are subject to the financial strength of the bond issuer and its ability to pay. Before investing, consult your financial advisor to understand the risks involved with purchasing bonds.